Welcome back. I want to thank you for staying with us because you are in for a treat. As I mentioned, we're going to hear from Janet Child. She's going to perform an original piece of music for us.
Thank you, Mary. This piece is called The Balancing Wheel, and I took my image from the song from the Native American medicine wheel. And for me, grief is like balancing on that wheel of life. And so I dedicate this to all of you who are grieving, to all of you who are journeying through loss to that place of healing. Between the darkness and the light, surrender and the fight. We are tenderly, angrily, joyously dancing on the balancing wheel, the balancing wheel, the balancing wheel. All the moments between dawn and night, we paint with passion, with delight, 'cause we are tenderly, angrily, joyously dancing on the balancing wheel, the balancing wheel, the balancing wheel. And here are the hands that join the circle, and here is the sorrow that opens up our eyes, and here is the hope that builds the beginning. Here is the honesty that strengthens our lives. Every moment between birth and death, we linger on every breath. We are tenderly, angrily, joyously, lovingly dancing on the balancing wheel, the balancing wheel.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wasn't that lovely? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of the balance, we talked about, before we left, some sadness and coming into emotional recognition, and we left off with a discussion about anger, and that one of the emotional expressions we may feel as anger at our loved ones or at ourselves. Can you, either one of you, speak to that for me?
Well, just in dealing with past clients, and one in particular, being a caretaker of her dying husband, was at the end of his journey before he died, and she was just exhausted, and there's things that she regretted saying to him that she dwells on a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. And things that he said when he wasn't feeling so well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So part of your work with her is to help her let go of that and retain other types of memories, or
Right.
is that?
Well, I don't try to stray away from hers, you know, that was a real thing that happened during that time, and acknowledge that it did happen, and just let her talk about it. And I think her talking about it, she has said, well, maybe it wasn't that awful.
Oh.
We did have some good days.
Good.
And I just kind of point out that there was some tense times towards the end, and he wasn't feeling well, and she wasn't feeling well.
So she needs to forgive herself.
And we're human.
Yeah, for being human.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And what Debbie is mentioning is so powerful, Mary, because there's a lot of times guilt attached with anger. So we have a hard time expressing our anger or really even acknowledging it, especially towards someone who is going through the dying process.
Yeah.
It's very hard to let ourselves be human and feel and express that anger. And also we can be angry at God, we can be angry at other people, we can be angry at the medical profession, we can be angry at death. And I know that even now, after years of working in this field, I still get angry with death when it takes away someone that I love. It's a real natural feeling, and I think the important thing about anger is expressing it, getting it from the inside to the outside, making it okay to have the anger and to express it. And sometimes the anger can actually give us some power and some energy in the overwhelming helplessness of grief. So it's not necessarily a negative emotion.
Yeah, I've definitely found that true in my experience, that anger can propel me to do what I need to do to take care of myself. What I'd like to do is take a look at the next 5 criteria that we still have not looked at, which comes from, again, the book Good Grief. A sense of guilt about the loss, which Janet, you just mentioned, anger and resentment, resistance to returning to normal, the emergence of hope, and the struggle to affirm reality. What about this resistance to returning to normal? Does that have to do with recognizing that if I go back to normal, that in some way I might forget the person that I love?
Absolutely. I think what happens is there are 2 resistances to getting back to normal. One is that we will never be able to go back to the old normal. And what's hard is trying to go back to the old normal is impossible. In fact, I had one beautiful woman whose daughter was murdered. And she said, Janet, I'll never be the old normal when my daughter was alive. But the work that I'm doing with grief is building a new normal. And when we build a new normal, it is without that loved one. And so how can we incorporate the memory and the goodness of that loved one into our lives so it is not forgotten? And I think many times we resist letting go of the pain because we're also afraid we'll lose the memories. And so the work of grief is sifting out the pain and letting that gently go, but keeping the love and memories in our hearts. You know, I had a client once that said, my heart's like a hotel, and everybody I love has a room in my heart hotel. When someone dies or goes away, nobody else can take their room in my heart hotel. And I thought that was the most beautiful description of grief.
Absolutely.
And so the work of grief is letting go of the gut-wrenching pain, but keeping the love and the memories in our hearts and keeping those alive and being able to talk about that loved one, being able to share those memories. And you know, Debbie mentioned something that I think is very important, and that is talking about the details. What our clients need to do most, and what we as grieving people need to do most, is to talk about the details of our loss. What hurts us the most? What is the most difficult to get through? What do we feel the most guilty about? What do we feel the most sad about? What's the hardest time of day? What do we feel the most angry about? What do we wish we hadn't have done that we did?
Yeah.
Do we wish we could have said that I love you one more time? Even though we may have said it 1,000 times, we always wish there was one more thing we could have done. So just being able to get down to the real specifics of what hurts the most helps us to identify the grief, and then it doesn't become so overwhelming because we can begin to look at the pieces of it.
And some of that work I know has to do with, because they're not available to us, we need to use metaphor, we need to use symbols, and
Yes.
I know I've been asked to do things like write eulogies for my grandmother, things like that. I know people sometimes write letters and burn them, or even create their own rituals, like you're talking about this woman after 33
Absolutely.
years had her own funeral or ritual or service, and so that's something you're able to assist people to do, to figure out what would be a meaningful way for them to have closure. The other thing I've heard is that people, that in many ways we never stop grieving, in the sense that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about why it is. I mean, we don't get to an ending place where it's like, well, I'm done now. Okay.
I don't think we ever get to an end place. I think it just is a way of our life now, and it's some days it's unmanageable, and other days we can glide through it. But I think when you lose a loved one, that person is always going to be missed by you, and you just manage that into your life, your everyday life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think what's hard about that is it's like a roller coaster ride. So one day
Right.
you might feel good, like she was saying, you know, I feel good, I feel like, you know, I'm finally getting over this grief, and then, you know, another wave of feeling hits. You hit a landmine, what we call a landmine at the center. It might be a song on the radio, it might be going to the grocery store and you see that person's favorite food. It might be a TV movie or something, or a person walking down the street that reminds you of that dead loved one. It can be anything, and these landmines come unexpectedly. So you're doing good, you're handling your life, and then you're hit with those landmines. Birthdays, holidays, anniversary dates, you know, are devastating times where the grief resurfaces. And so to understand that that ebbing and flowing is normal. It doesn't mean you're going crazy, and it doesn't mean that you haven't done your grief work.
That's right.
It just means that it is normal and natural.
And what I found was, too, that there's just an overall sensitivity in general
Exactly.
to other people's pain. I mean, I
Yes.
found that I have, like, you know, radar for other
Yes.
people who are grieving. I just find them everywhere I go. And I would have done, I mean, as a therapist, I'm attuned anyway, but I found particularly after losing my grandmother, it's like billboards flashing, you know, and that ability to go in and out of your own personal pain. At the same time, you do need to keep functioning. The reality is the world does go on. You know, I mean, you still have to pay your bills, you have to do this, you have to do that. And I know for me, that was kind of strange. That sort of, this very important, monumental event has happened to me.
Yes.
And yet you get up the next morning and you get dressed and you go to work and everything else goes on the same. And that's such an odd, it's like everyone should know.
That's
you know,
right.
people don't know. And I know we used to be able to wear armbands, and we used to be able to dress in black for a year.
Right.
And we just don't have that option anymore. So it's hard to know when someone else is grieving. And that's the other question I want to ask you, because we're going to have to close here in about a minute. But the classic thing people say is, what do I say? Okay, I'm afraid to go to a funeral. I'm afraid to talk to somebody about their grief, because what do I say to them? What would you recommend for our people listening?
Sometimes the best thing to say is, I don't know what to say in the face of your grief, but I want to be here for you, and I would love to listen and hear how it's been for you. Tell me what's been the hardest, and I want to be here. And, you know, just your presence and willingness to be there. Many times people will say at the funeral, I don't remember what she said, but I remember the quality of her presence, how she touched me, how she looked into my eyes. That's what people remember. So be honest, be sincere. There is nothing we can say in the face of the loss, but we can be there, and we can be an active reminder that gives that person permission to grieve.
I want to thank you so much for being with us today to talk about a very sensitive topic. I want to thank you again for your beautiful music.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being with us. Don't want to leave you out. Join us in the upcoming weeks as we address infidelity and surviving unemployment. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.